I'm Steve Martin.
In just a few years, Steve Martin's comedy career exploded from bombing in empty bars to selling out stadiums. At his height, he was performing for over 500,000 people a year, and his Grammy-winning albums altered the cultural zeitgeist with famous catchphrases like,
"Well, excuse me!"
These kids today, they don't know that Steve Martin was a monster.
As a comedian, everything he touched turned to gold.
I loved it. When it got so big, I loved it. I thought, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe.
But despite loving the journey, the top became lonely, and Steve inexplicably quit.
I didn't announce that I was stopping. I just stopped.
I didn't want to. I was depressed.
So after 18 years of climbing his way to the top, Steve Martin quit stand-up comedy overnight. But what happened? The year was 1973, and America was in a crisis. There was war, corruption, and comedy had become angry and political, until the wild and crazy college dropout named Steve Martin came along and changed everything.
I thought, everything is political. It's all about anger. And I thought, that's gonna be over soon, and I'm gonna be right there, and I'm gonna be silly.
It's not easy getting that air to curl up inside your lungs like that.
Steve's silly vision took him to the top of Showbiz Mountain, but it didn't happen overnight. In his book, he says he spent 10 years learning, 4 years refining, and 4 years in wild success. And those first 10 years were grueling.
He had the best teacher, an empty room, no one coming in, and you had to do your comedy.
I had to go on with no audience because there was a window to the street. And the way the club worked is people would walk by and they'd say, oh, something's going on in here, let's go in. So to start the night off, I always had to get up and start doing my comedy act with no one there.
Steve would perform up to 5 to 6 times a night grinding out gigs like this, trying anything to get a laugh, including other people's jokes.
I have this act, it's like 25 minutes long. And I'd gotten stuff, I borrowed something from Carl Ballantine, and I got some stuff from joke books and things I'd heard and go, that sounds good.
Around this time, Steve also blended in with the other comedians, dressed like a hippie with his scraggly beard. But what he did next changed his career and comedy forever.
I cut my hair, shaved my beard, and I put on a suit. As I say in the book, it's suddenly, instead of being at the tail end of an old movement, I was in the front end of a new one.
It was like Steve went from Clark Kent to Superman. His iconic white suit became as much a part of his act as his material, and was even recently auctioned off for $20,000. But there is way more than just a suit that led to Steve Martin's success.
When I was young, I thought, there'll be a changing of the guard, and someone's going to take over. Why not me?
And me is exactly what set Steve apart from anyone else. Not me, the Steve me. His originality is what put him on the fast track to fame.
Steve really wanted to do comedy on his own terms. He wanted to be unique. He wanted to do something that people hadn't seen before.
What he was doing, his albums, they were so silly and so fun and so different.
Everything Steve did was to the contrary of the norm of this era. How he dressed, how he talked, how he performed. It was all very intentional.
Steve Martin was the first one where I went, you're not even doing show business.
Right.
What are you doing? You're just being really weird.
His transformation into the silly seems like an obvious call today, knowing his success. But at the time, this decision was a leap of faith, forcing him to scrap most of his material he had worked a decade to develop.
Dropped all material that I had gotten out of joke books, and I said, I have to write it all. Otherwise, it's not going to have a stamp of authorship on it. And I thought, oh, this is so awful. If I'm going to have any kind of distinction at all, everything has to be new, everything. And so I went through my act and had to eliminate more than half. The audience can never hear something they've heard before, even subconsciously. That was kind of a crisis, and I thought, well, how do I write material?
So Steve did what any comedian looking for new material would do, not write jokes.
What if
I never delivered a punchline.
Exactly. That's what. Yeah. Right.
And so now they're sitting there waiting for me to do something that would indicate to them that it was time to laugh. There's two kinds of laughter. One is when you're watching a comedian and he says a joke and then you laugh at it because you heard the punchline. And I thought, but there's another kind of laughter too. When you're home with your friends and you're laughing so hard and you're crying, you don't know why you're laughing. And I thought, what if I could go for that?
Up until this moment, the universal law of comedy had been set up, punchline.
I told my wife she was lousy in bed. She went out, she got a second opinion.
And I was looking at this and I was thinking, the audience hears the punchline and they actually know they're supposed to laugh. It doesn't matter if it was really funny, they just know they're supposed to laugh at that moment. And it's like when a song ends, everybody goes like this.
To build his new act, Steve still kept some of his new tricks.
I kept the banjo in because I was doing very silly comedy stuff. And I wanted the audience to know I could also do something hard.
In addition to music, Steve incorporated props from his childhood, which became as iconic as his jokes. And it was all by accident.
Well, I must have looked like an idiot up here.
A lot of people don't know that some of those early props that we all laughed at so hard, like the arrow through the head, those were from the magic shop,
Yeah, I
right?
used to work at a magic shop, and I viewed them as ironic. It's funny, but it's not funny, and so therefore it's funny again.
The funny thing about Steve Martin is his definition of what a joke is.
And when I say joke, I use it, it's sort of a shorthand that we use, and it really describes a moment rather than a joke with a punchline.
And it's here we get to the 3 moments that transformed Steve Martin's career from silly to serious business.
3 elements. One would be The Tonight Show. Second would be my first record. And the third would be Saturday Night Live.
Let's talk about those.
These were escalating.
Yeah.
And after these 3 moments, Steve's career escalated quickly. Steve's first appearance on The Tonight Show was such a hit, he became a regular on the show and even guest hosted several times. After his appearance on Johnny Carson, Steve was on a mission, releasing his double platinum debut album, Let's Get Small.
Double platinum albums.
What does that mean?
Means they sold over 2 million copies.
This Grammy-winning album featured his national catchphrase,
Well, excuse me.
and many other iconic bits, including the title track from the album he performed on SNL.
Hey, let's get small.
And it's his appearance on SNL that changed everything.
I was just starting to break as Saturday Night Live was starting to break. So I went on and hosted Saturday Night Live, and I had a show the next night. I'm ready to go on. I said, how many people are out there? They said, 7,000. I said, 7,000? And I was still learning how to play to 3,500. I said, 7,000. And I walked out, and there was this cheer. Then I understood the power of SNL and television and everything, and it just completely changed everything.
SNL catapulted Steve Martin into a household name. Many of his famous catchphrases and characters were born on the show and translated into his stand-up.
We are two wild and crazy guys.
SNL is also where he found his first musical success, with King Tut selling over 1 million copies. After this one appearance, Steve quickly became a regular on both SNL and Johnny Carson, giving him more exposure on TV, leading to more tickets sold on stage. Who was once a college dropout performing to empty bars, now became the hottest comedy star in the world. What could possibly go wrong? At the height of Steve's stand-up career, he had transcended from a philosopher-comedian to comedy rock star. It's funny that Steve's contrarian approach to comedy that never existed before helped him to have success no comedian had ever had before.
It's kind of hard to overstate how big he was.
When it got so big, I loved it. I thought, I can't believe this is happening.
The worst thing that can happen to a comic is you get real soft because everybody loves you and they go to see you and they laugh at anything you say. That's one of the reasons why Steve Martin said he stopped touring.
Every show, people started yelling out his punchlines and reciting his material like karaoke, to the point to where he lost control.
Well, you stopped.
You know what? I didn't have a choice.
It was just runaway train.
Yeah, you had to kind of break it because it was also the kind of thing the audience could tire of so quickly.
He just felt like anything he did, they laughed at, and he lost track of whether or not it was good or not.
More successful, meaning larger stadiums. It had a more rock and roll attitude, meaning the audience was wilder. And you can control it up to a point, but there's always annoying people in the audience who won't let the show happen. This is about something else, and it eventually ruined it for me.
I felt an incredible responsibility when people were paying a lot of money to come see me, and I thought, you know what, I better be good. And there was a lot of pressure on that.
It's not just the overwhelming crowds that got to Steve. He was struggling personally with all the fame.
I think that's why Steve Martin quit, because he was a parody of a comedian.
And more comedian parodies were soon to follow. During the comedy boom of the 80s, Steve's silly characters were being replaced by more bombastic characters like Andrew Dice Clay and Sam Kinison.
Part of my goal was to be absurd in a very serious time. I could tell that the era was ending too. I could feel it.
I was creatively dead for stand-up.
I didn't announce that I was stopping. Right. I just stopped.
I felt something afterwards that I had never felt in my career, which was respect.
After working over a decade to build the show that gave him fame, he was struggling to stay motivated. He just released the hit movie The Jerk, and his creative attention was shifting.
Comics, it's like you have to love doing what you do and actually do it.
35 years later, he performed a stand-up set with Seinfeld. And when asked if he missed it, Steve said,
I miss absolutely nothing about it.
Steve Martin's entire goal was to bring the absurdity to a serious time. His fun approach to comedy is what inspired me to become a comedian. And with today's comedy just as political as it was when Steve started, it feels like we need his silly now more than ever. So what comic genius is going to be the next comedian to bring back the silly? I'm comedian Joel Byers, and please subscribe so my wife doesn't make me get a real job.